Operating a motorcycle requires a different combination of physical and mental skills than those used in driving four-wheel vehicles. Motorcyclists and their passengers are more vulnerable to the hazards of weather and road conditions than drivers in closed vehicles. The injuries sustained by motorcycle riders during crashes also tend to be more severe, such as head injury, road rash, broken bones, or other fatal injuries. Motorcyclists are more vulnerable and are more likely to be injured or killed than car occupants, with data showing 29 times more fatalities. Data also indicates that older riders appear to sustain more serious injuries than younger riders, as riders over 50 account for 37% of all deaths. Alcohol use remains a major factor in motorcycle accidents, as it potentially impacts driver alertness and response. Distraction, speeding and the road conditions are also a major factor in fatal crashes. Distracted driving. It is believed that distracted driving plays a role in approximately 40% of motorcycle accidents. Bad road conditions. Since it is harder to maneuver a two-wheeler, dangerous road conditions are more likely to contribute to a fatal accident. Things like bad weather, potholes, bumpy roads and debris increase the likelihood of losing control of your bike. Not enough protective gear. It may not always save you in the event of an accident, but any kind of protective gear, helmets, boots, chest protection and clothing, will increase your chances of making it out alive. And at the end, bike defects. Sometimes motorcycle accidents are caused simply because the motorcycle has defective parts, or even the motorcycle itself that has been hastily conceived safety mods and built by some manufacturer without enough test riding. And it's called the Widowmaker. A skittish motorbike with a touch of blood in it is better than all the riding animals on earth, because of its logical extension of our faculties, and the hint, the provocation, to excess conferred by its honeyed untiring smoothness. The Road. Written by T.E. Lawrence. The Lawrence of Arabia. In 30s, it was called the Rolls-Royce of motorcycles. As the great-granddaddy of all modern bikes, the Brough Superior is legendary and will always hold a special place in people's hearts. But you have to remember that what we have here is essentially 1920s technology, putting out 50 horsepower. Other bikes of those days were lucky to have 15 horses, so the modern day equivalent would be like Ducati or Honda releasing a sports bike with 350 horsepower and 0 electronic aids to contain it. With World War II, and all its technological advancements yet to happen, George Brough had created a real mechanical monster that few could ride properly and still fewer would be able to master it. Even with loads of riding experience, and numerous Brough Superiors to his name, the bike was too much for Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence's Brough Superior, perhaps the 30s equivalent of a modern Suzuki Hayabusa Hypersports Tourer, had almost no brakes, almost no suspension, and a hand gear change, making engine braking a terrifying prospect. And yet, it gave 52 horsepower. The rider wore no helmet, and no goggles, and certainly no Kevlar body armor. Lawrence of Arabia. A survivor of World War I, Brough took his life in 1935, after he misjudged an overtake, hit a dip in the road and went over the bars without a helmet on. Wonder how many other, not so famous Brough riders met a similar fate? In the 70s, when men were men, and hospitals were full of motocrossers, After the 70s superhit movie, On Any Sunday, off-road motorcycling had suddenly become a big sport. At this time, all the manufacturers were scrambling to get their dirt bikes into the market. Suzuki Motorcycles introduced their first proper, open-class motocrosser in 1971. Powered by a very impressive 400cc two-stroke smoker, and putting out 40 horsepower. People were pumped to try these little yellow beasts in the dirt. But then, the bike's shortcomings became apparent. Built on a too-soft frame, and with supremely front and back, under-spec D-shocks, the thing was a handful to ride, even for a pro. But the problems didn't stop there. Suzuki also included the pointless electronic ignition system, that did a really bad job of advancing and retarding the bike's timing. The net effect here was that the engine would randomly move its peak power around the rev counter in a life-threatening game. From all reports, it will surprise you with a big kick in the backside. Suzuki went into overdrive to stop all the broken bones with a heavier flywheel and better shocks. They even dropped the pointless ignition too, but it didn't really matter in the end, as they were already being outclassed on the world's tracks by an army of far superior makers and CZs. The late 70s and early 80s were dark years for the Milwaukee Giants, running on nothing but fumes and the pop culture status the 60s had afforded the brand. They somehow managed to continue releasing new bikes, including, they're all important, the Sportster models. And as for those poor unsuspecting customers who actually fronted up to a dealer with a bag full of their hard-earned to purchase the bike, in the early 80s, let's just say, they inherited all the fruits of the previous decade's complete shit show. The Sportsters of this era were as fast and maneuverable as they were well built. That is to say, they were some of the worst, slowest and most cumbersome bikes Harley ever produced. They probably would have hurt more riders if it wasn't for the fact that they basically shook themselves to pieces soon after they left the showroom floor. How can a Harley sales manager tell a customer that they've bought a chubby, shaking lemon of a bike without losing his job? The Suzuki TL1000S is a great example of a bike that was dangerous not because it was crap, but because it was pushing the advanced engineering envelope a little too far. On paper, the thing looked like a real winner, a big V-twin sports bike from a respected Japanese manufacturer. What's not to like? So in 1997, Suzuki fans were frothing. And the bike did not disappoint. Great reviews saw good sales, but then things went a little southward. Suzuki's engineers had faced a considerable challenge when placing the big, long V-twin in the bike's frame. Put simply, the engine was taking up the space in front of the rear wheel, where the bike's shock usually sits. Their answer was to go with a tricky and largely untested shock damper and spring setup that had been lifted directly from 90s F1 racing. The rear spring was placed on the right side of the bike, and a remote rotary-style rear damper tried to do its job through a set of spinning arms, some valves and a tablespoon or two of hydraulic fluid. But it just plain didn't work, and any serious up and down action for the rear shock would result in the oil overheating and the damping going right out the window. so the bike's rear end would get lazy. Then you had a big, torquey V-twin and a soft, saggy rear wheel, which made the front of the bike about as steady and reliable as a tipsy Italian prime minister. And into the scenery you'd go. Look hard enough and you'll still find a bunch of TLS devotees out there. You'll be able to spot them easily enough. They're the ones, on crutches, swearing black and blue, that the bike is the best thing they've ever owned. At the top. And what a bike it is! Following on from the almost equally as dangerous H1 Mach 3 500cc. The 72's two-stroke triple, with an astounding 750cc showed that Kawasaki has learned nothing from the broken bones caused by the H1. With a jaw-dropping combination of far too much power, a rear-biased weight balance, and a frame that seemingly made from rubber tubing. The H2 was an accident waiting to happen. The pencil-thin front forks, the totally under-spec'd brakes, and the horrible 1970s rubber. You may have also neglected to talk about the fact that the bike would spontaneously wheelie under full throttle acceleration when the two-stroke triple hit the 3,500 RPM power band on its way to a 12-second flat quarter mile. And that's on a bike that weighed in at 190 kilos dripping wet. Damn. What a wild ride that must have been. It's like they didn't even bother to test the thing before they started selling it. Needless to say, even a pro rider would have been fighting to keep the little buggers under control. There is no chance of managing them. Lucky for Kawasaki, it was the freewheeling 70s, so despite the army of injured riders and smashed up H2s, they just grimaced a little, pointed at something off in the distance, and then pretended it all didn't happen. Looked like they had forced their engineers and test riders to make some rather hastily conceived safety mods for the 73 and 74 models. After all, market research has since shown that customers find it very hard to purchase new motorcycles when they are dead.